We trust the police to protect and serve. But what happens when they become the criminals? Today, we're looking at two absolutely wild but true stories that happened at the same time in two different places where entire police units basically became the mob. That's a quote from a detective talking about Miami in the 1980s. And honestly, he wasn't exaggerating. The city was drowning in cocaine money and cartel violence. We're talking about high-speed chases and shootouts on the highway during rush hour, machine gun fights in mall parking lots. It was pure chaos, and that line between the good guys and the bad guys was getting really, really blurry. And that really is the heart of the matter, isn't it? Because this whole thing in Miami, well, it wasn't a one-off. At the very same time, a story that was almost identical was playing out hundreds of miles away in Puerto Rico. It just goes to show what can happen when law enforcement goes completely off the rails. So, let's get into it. How in the world did two totally different police departments create the exact same kind of monster? Well, it turns out they were both dealing with a perfect storm, a mix of crime, desperation, and, you guessed it, opportunity. I mean, look at this. The parallels are just undeniable. Both places were completely overwhelmed by the cocaine trade. Miami was also dealing with the fallout from the Mariel boat lift, where Fidel Castro basically emptied his prisons, sending thousands of hardened criminals to Florida. The city had to hire hundreds of new cops, fast, and let's just say background checks weren't always the top priority. Meanwhile, in Puerto Rico, you had powerful drug gangs running wild and a justice system that just couldn't cope. The whole situation was a tinderbox, just waiting for a match. And well, that match was lit. This rot, this corruption, it didn't stay a secret for long. It exploded out into the open, with two crimes so brutal and so shocking that there was just no way to ignore them. Okay, so in July of 1985, three bodies get pulled from the Miami River. At first, it looks like an accident, but these guys were drug smugglers, and a $27 million shipment of cocaine they were guarding had just vanished. Now rewind 5 years earlier to Puerto Rico. A key witness in a huge murder trial, a woman named Jessica Trujillo, is found shot execution style while she was supposed to be under 24/7 police protection. And to make it even more tragic, she was 3 months pregnant. And this, right here, is where both of these stories take a seriously terrifying turn. In Miami, witnesses said the guys who attacked the smugglers were dressed like cops. In Puerto Rico, the evidence pointed to Jessica being killed inside a homicide chief's own car. In both cities, the investigators started to realize the horrifying truth. The prime suspects were their own colleagues. So, think about that for a second. How do you possibly investigate killers who carry a badge? How do you hunt people who know every single trick in your playbook? This was, without a doubt, one of the most dangerous and difficult jobs these investigators had ever faced. This quote from a detective in the special Miami unit called CENTAC 26 really says it all. This wasn't just another homicide case. They were literally hunting other cops. And that meant the people they were hunting could hunt them right back. The CENTAC 26 team had to take some pretty extreme steps just to stay safe. Right away, they went to the police chief and had their own personnel files put under lock and key. They literally scrubbed their home addresses from every public record they could find. They created this total wall of secrecy around their unit because they had absolutely no idea who in the department they could trust. And in Puerto Rico, the FBI and local investigators were hitting the exact same wall. Every time they tried to ask the homicide division about Jessica's murder, it was the same thing. Don't remember. Didn't see anything. It was a total stonewall. That infamous blue wall of silence slammed right in their faces. So in both of these cases, it seemed like they were at a dead end. These walls of silence were just impenetrable. To have any chance of cracking them, they needed a key. They needed someone on the inside to finally break ranks and talk. First, let's talk motive. $27 million. That's what the cocaine that Miami cops stole in just that one river incident was worth. With that kind of money flying around, people get greedy, they get reckless, and they get scared. And fear can make people do some crazy things. So the whole Miami case finally broke open because of this guy, Armando Un. He was a nightclub worker who was helping a crew of crooked cops, led by an officer named Marco Rivera, set up these drug ripoffs. But then, Un's friend and business partner gets found murdered, stuffed into a box out in the Everglades. Un knew right then and there that he was next on the list, so he ran to the CENTAC 26 detectives and spilled everything. Now, the insider in Puerto Rico, well, that was even crazier. He was one of them. Detective Victor Swolze was one of the last two officers to see Jessica Trujillo alive. The FBI basically cornered him. They appealed to his conscience, telling him, look, this is your one chance to be a good cop. And he flipped. He exposed this secret society within the police department called El Muerta Escuadra, the Death Squad. And then he did something incredibly brave. He agreed to wear a wire on his old partners. And let me tell you who these guys were. The Death Squad wasn't just a couple of rogue officers. This was a powerful group of the highest-ranking detectives in the elite CIC division. They were described as their own little kingdom, a fiefdom that answered to nobody. They used their badges and all their inside knowledge to rob drug dealers, kidnap diamond merchants, and even carry out contract killings. They thought they were completely untouchable. So now, with these insiders spilling the beans, the investigators finally had the ammo they needed to bring these whole organizations down. The house of cards was shaking, and it was about to come crashing down. But it still wasn't easy. I mean, the first trial for the Miami River cops, it ended in a mistrial. The prosecutors were just stunned. Then they found out the cops' families had been bribing and threatening the jurors. But that just made the prosecution dig in harder. They found a hitman the cops hired to silence their star witness, and they even managed to flip one of the dirty cops who confessed to everything and agreed to testify. Of course, the ringleaders all fled, sparking these huge international manhunts. Oswaldo Correchioyo was tracked down in the Bahamas. Armando Garcia actually made it onto the FBI's 10 most wanted list before he was finally caught in Cali, Colombia, 4 years later. The walls were closing in for sure. The end for the Puerto Rico death squad was something straight out of a movie. Their leader, the untouchable Alejo Del Monte, orchestrated the kidnapping of a jeweler's son. But here's the crazy part. The victim's dad just happened to be the next-door neighbor of the lead FBI agent on the case. The FBI tapped the family's phone and heard Alejo himself on the line arranging the ransom drop. So they set up surveillance, and they watched as Alejo drove to the drop site to pick up the cash himself. They arrested him right there on the spot. And when the dust finally settled, the numbers were just staggering. 17 Miami officers and 32 people in Puerto Rico, mostly cops, were convicted. These scandals forced some real, lasting change. Miami set up a whole new internal investigations unit, and in Puerto Rico, they completely got rid of the elite CIC division that the death squad had called home. There's this one last great detail. When the fugitive cop Armando Garcia was finally caught down in Colombia, he tried to bribe the local police, offered them cash, cars, you name it. And their response was just perfect. They looked him dead in the eye and said, "We're not the dirty cops you are." You know, these stories show that sometimes the answer is a few incredibly brave investigators and insiders who are willing to risk absolutely everything. But it leaves us with a really important question to chew on. When the system fails, who's left to watch the watchers?